Hi, everyone. Welcome to CSR Talent Group's Corporate Impact Leaders podcast. Today, we're pleased to speak with Jessie End, the Vice President of Social Good and Nonprofit Partnerships at Dataminr. Welcome, Jessie. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Tom. Good to be here.
For those people joining us today who don't know much about Dataminr, can you tell us a little bit about your company and also your role and responsibility at the company?
Absolutely. So Dataminr at its heart is an AI company. Our AI platform provides real-time critical event detection so that organizations can know first and act faster. What that means, in short, is that we are primarily used for physical and cybersecurity needs across different sectors. So from corporations to public sector entities to nonprofit entities, because for physical and cybersecurity needs, speed is essential. And so our AI platform is designed, it's really the sense-making machine, and it's trained on and pulling from millions of publicly available data sources to recognize meaningful events as they unfold around the world. My job as VP of Social Good and Nonprofit Partnerships is to figure out how best we can leverage both our products, so our real-time alerting solutions, as well as our expertise. So that could be the AI expertise for the benefit of society. So while we also work with physical and cybersecurity professionals within nonprofit organizations, we have a slightly broader scope because we're able to leverage that expertise beyond just the product.
That's fantastic. That sounds so interesting. Um, and so relevant to today. So tell us a little bit about some of the programs that you oversee and some of the initiatives that the company has that fall under this category of social good and nonprofit partnerships.
Yeah, it's a mouthful. So like I said, my job is to try and figure out how to use our product and our expertise. And so I'd say our two kind of flagship programs, if you will, align with that. So one program is First Alert for nonprofits, and that's essentially how we put the product, our real-time alerting platform for the public sector, which is First Alert, in the hands of nonprofit and social impact organizations around the world. And we do that both through free and discounted programming, depending on sort of the organization, the scope and scale of their needs, and then providing ongoing support from our customer success professionals who support the organizations to make sure that they're getting the most out of our platform. A lot of our partners who have been on the platform for a long time know how to use it, but they might be responding, they are often responding to major events that can arise suddenly, so like conflicts and things like that. So my team's there to reach out and say, hey, do you want us to create a new, we call them watch lists, for this particular conflict or this particular country or this particular city, depending on what the nature of the event is, so that there is no gap essentially in those organizations getting the information they need when they need it. On the expertise side, that was something that I started when I joined Dataminr, and that's our social innovation lab. Right now, we have one sort of flagship program underneath the social innovation lab, which is our AI for Good program. We run that as like a public call for proposals once a year. So we invite social impact organizations all around the world, large and small, from every geography. We're really interested in getting proposals from the global south to propose ideas for how they might leverage AI to further their mission. And then we choose 2 or 3 projects to work on each year. And those are long-term, deep partnerships to build custom AI models to support that organization and their mission. So usually the engagements last somewhere between 9 to 12 months between scoping the projects, beginning to work on the projects, iterating on them, and then sending the deliverables to our partners for implementation. Yeah.
That's fascinating. Can you expand a little bit on the types of projects? So you mentioned conflicts, and maybe I missed this, but do you also help nonprofits working on natural disasters or major events like that? Tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah, really, we're sort of an event-based company. So our AI is trained to detect events as they emerge and develop and evolve over time. And that can be any type of event. It is primarily events that impact people's safety and security, because that's sort of the how the company was originally born, where it was born from, the idea it was born from. But yeah, natural disasters. It can be something as big as the hurricanes that hit the South in the United States last fall, to something like local flooding in an area of Kenya, right? So the scale can depend on the organization, their location, and the needs. And then obviously emerging conflicts is a big one. Political events and things like that are also things we report on, or alert on. The events like outbreaks, health, disease outbreaks. We have organizations that we support that are interested to know when cholera is on the rise in a particular place. So anything that can kind of be described as an event
Hmm.
versus sort of a trend is something that we're likely to be recognizing and providing alerts on.
It's fascinating. Well, I'm sure we could talk for another couple hours about some of those programs, but just to wrap this question up, are some of those programs on your website? If people are interested in learning more about some of the things that you do with some of the partners, can they find that on your website?
Yeah, so we're actually in the process of redesigning our website, so it'll be a new, fresh experience sometime this month. But yeah, our three programs are First Alert for Nonprofits. So all the stuff I just described, if you're interested in real-time alerting on those types of events, you'll be able to go to our website and click a request information button. We have a pretty brief process for verifying that the organization qualifies for our social good or nonprofit support. So we have some eligibility criteria, and we can go for there. For people who are sort of more advanced data science oriented people who are interested in playing around with data, we also have an API and different connectors available for those techies, which sort of falls into the same eligibility criteria. And people can sign up to learn when our next RFP for the AI for Good program is released.
Oh,
It's
great.
usually released in the late spring every year, so it'll
Yeah.
probably come out in April or May. But yeah, on our website, they can sign up for our newsletter, and then they'll get a notification when the RFP opens.
Terrific. That's very helpful. Thank you.
Mhm.
Um, let's switch gears a little bit. So you've talked about the positives, the work that you're doing around AI. And I'm sure many of the people listening are obviously not as well educated on AI, and we've all heard about some of the great benefits that we'll see in the future as well as now. But many people have concern about AI. So I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about how the company approaches AI as far as communicating with stakeholders and the rationale for this work, I'm sure, is to help people see the possible, benefits of AI. But tell us more about that and how that's navigated at the company.
Yeah, so I think, I mean, first I'll just come straight out and say there are absolutely risks and benefits to AI. I think anyone who denies one side is missing the boat.
Mm.
Both are true. I heard one of our partners at the UN a few years ago describe it this way, and this is sort of my attitude. You don't want the risk of misuse leading to misuse, right? So you have to put the proper protections in place to ensure that artificial intelligence is not misused, whether that's unintentionally or intentionally by bad actors. But also, you don't want to get so caught up on that you're missing opportunities to deploy it for the benefit of society, which there are innumerable ways that it can benefit society. I often think about it through the lens of responsible and appropriate technology. So I sort of take a step out of AI for a second and just think about technology writ large. I think you hear a lot of people talking about responsible technology. Is this ethical? How do we put protections in place, regulation? All of that stuff is critical and important. But I rarely hear people talking about appropriate technology, and that's really about making sure that you're matching the right solution to the problem, right? So sometimes while people may be concerned about the risk of AI, there's also this sort of shiny object syndrome where people are like, where can we use it? The like possibilities are endless. And there's pressure from funders, there's pressure from communications teams, et cetera, within all of these nonprofit and social impact organizations to like figure out how to use AI. And you have to make sure that your problem is well scoped and that you're starting with a problem and you're not starting with the technology. Like, you don't want to start with AI and then go look for a problem it can help solve. You want to start with the problems you've identified that are critical priorities for your organization, and then find the technology that fits it. And so that's kind of how I think about what my team does and how we decide which partners to work with, particularly on our AI for Good program. We want to make sure that we're thinking about what the impact is, what the implications are for using AI for whatever the problem is that we're helping an organization solve. But we also want to make sure that it's the right way to solve the problem. And to give you an example of that, I think when you shared some stuff before this interview about what some of those concerns are, one of them is you mentioned was job displacement. And so what I think about, one of our partners for the latest AI for Good cohorts, we're just starting to work on that project now, is with an organization called Mnemonic. And what they are is essentially a data storehouse of the data that they store or collect and organize is all evidence of violations or potential evidence of violations of international law, international human rights law. And it's used by not mnemonic, but by prosecutors of those sorts of crimes all around the world. And so one of the challenges that they have is they have millions and millions of different pieces of data or evidence, right? And that can come in multiple formats. That can come in text, audio, imagery, video evidence, right? That makes it very hard for prosecutors of these crimes to find, to access it, and then find the right evidence to use in their cases. And so the project we're working on with Mnemonic will allow Mnemonic to essentially classify that data so that it becomes more accessible, usable, findable by those prosecutors. And I use this as an example of like appropriate technology, because what the AI is doing is enhancing the work that humans do. It is not doing something that humans could do in any sort of practical time period to make that data useful. Humans trying to classify millions of multimodal data in a timely way such that prosecutors can use it and actually have an impact on the world, it's just not within human capability, right? And so that's really where AI shines, is where it enhances the work that humans do, because it's something that humans can't do, and it allows them to do it faster and more effective, but it doesn't actually replace them.
Yeah.
So that's what's one thing I think in terms of protections worth mentioning, that like Dataminr puts a lot of that stuff in place. So we're not, I don't mean the brand here, but we're not an open AI platform. So people can't put data into our AI system and interact directly with our AI. Our AI is on the back end and it powers our applications. We only use publicly available data, which is a big concern, is data privacy. So all the information that our AI is trained on and then uses to create the alerts is publicly available. It's also, per our earlier conversation, trained to recognize events, not individuals or trends or insights or interpretation, right? So it's sort of, we deal in facts and events. And I think that's another way that we keep our platform safe for our users and the people who are putting data out there into the public sphere.
So interesting. one of the common themes of our work is when I talk to companies and people in your position is that staffing is often limited, and sometimes that makes sense. So I'm curious, how many staff do you have? It sounds like you're really working with a lot of different departments and different people within the company to provide support to these nonprofits or on the programs or initiatives that you're working on. So can you talk a little bit about that and how you're structured and to achieve your goals and how you work with different departments to achieve those goals?
Yeah, so I have a team of four people, five including me. So we're a relatively small team. I think we're a nice sized team considering some of the trends I've seen in corporate social responsibility out there in the world. Um, I think, well, I guess maybe what I'll do is I'll start with our goals as a team and then kind of explain how I've staffed against those. So we really have, like at the 30,000 foot view, three goals as a team. One is sort of reach, I would say, right? And it's really about our impact and the breadth of our impact. So one of our primary goals this year is to reach more organizations with a kind of like pie in the sky dream to be as ubiquitous as possible for any organization that can benefit from the kinds of services that we deliver. They have access to us. Um, Reputation is a big one, and one that you'll see on a lot of corporate social impact teams. For our team, given what Dataminr does, I think that's a combination of like brand awareness, trust, right? When to your earlier question, when you work in AI, trust can be a big question, and so being able to help people understand AI and its benefits, I think is really important. And then sort of a thought leadership, and that all kind of falls into the reputation bucket. And then something that you won't see on all CSI teams or CSR teams for me is sustainability. I came from a sales role. I spent 5.5 years running a sales team at Google. And I know how companies make decisions, especially in difficult times. So if you are a cost center for your company, you're always going to be at risk. I think what my team does at Dataminr is more important than a sales target, but I also don't want to have a target on our back. So for me, in the long run, I think it's really important that we are covering the costs of our team so that we don't become expendable. That way, any benefit that we provide society or the company is gravy because there's no sort of additional cost associated with what we're doing. What I bring that up because, oh, and actually, probably worth mentioning here too is I've made an active decision to hold off on pulling in ESG functions, philanthropy functions. We're finding sort of small and contained ways to do corporate volunteering because those are functions that generally add to the cost of your team, and they're things that you tend to see at more, I think, Dataminr is a relatively small company, around 700 people. We're still in the startup phase. And so those functions tend to be things that you see at larger firms, more established firms, more mature firms, because they do have additional cost associated with them. So with those goals of like reach, reputation, and sustainability, or self-sustainability, I guess I'll call it, we're staffed to kind of have, and this is actually a change I made this year, to have one person responsible for each of our primary functions so that there's greater ownership and focus for each of them. And then each of them of those three goals has a primary one and a secondary one. And that also allows them to really like know what their job is to accomplish for our team, our company, and our partners, and to be able to measure that effectively versus having sort of like, oh, we're benefiting the company and we're benefiting the world. It's much more specific, and they have very measurable goals against those.
Can I just ask a follow-up question on the self-sustainability? Because I want to make sure I understood that. You said that you're a cost center and you're wanting not to add additional costs, but did you say that you're covering your cost as well, or is it more about just maintaining those?
That's the goal, is to get to a point where we cover the cost. So we do what a lot of tech companies in the space do, which is to provide some portion of your product or services pro bono. And then at a certain level of scale, then you begin offering discounted or
I
discounts
see.
against the product. And so my team, while we don't operate like a sales team, we do in
Yeah,
fact generate our own revenue. And I think that's really important for offsetting our AI for Good program is entirely pro bono. It uses a lot of staff time. It's 2 or 3 partners a year and really, really deep partnerships. And it's wonderful, and it gets great story, provides great stories for our company, but it doesn't generate revenue. And so balancing our portfolio of offerings in such a way that we can engage with nonprofits in a variety of ways, and in ways that allow us to generate some revenue to offset the costs of a deep, impactful program like that, I think is key to our long-term, like our longevity as a team. Yeah.
yeah, no, that makes total sense. And thanks for explaining that. I think a lot of people will be interested in that model because I think,
Mhm.
and we'll talk about this in a second, a lot of companies may not be spending much money in this area. So to have a self-sustainability approach, I think is smart, and um, a lot of people will be interested in it. So you've done, it sounds like you've done some really interesting work in the middle of doing interesting work. Can you talk a little bit about what you would call a success? What's worked really well, maybe an example from a program that you're proud of, and maybe talk a little bit about the challenges too, because I can imagine in some of these programs with some of these nonprofits who are struggling in a war-torn area or with a major disaster, there's going to be all kinds of challenges too that we can't even imagine.
Yeah. Um, yeah. So let me figure out the right order to to
Go
tackle
in
that
any
question.
order, whatever.
Well,
Like,
I'm like, I want to lead with a positive, but I don't want to end
yeah,
with a negative. So, no,
come back
I
to a
think
positive if you'd like.
yeah, that's right. I'll do the sandwich thing.
Yeah, yeah,
So I think, I'm very, very proud of our AI for Good program because, like I said, these are deep, long-term relationships with these partners, and very like deep investment where we're not just like building something for them and then handing it over and saying good luck. We are really developing the AI models with them, with their constant input, with iteration to make sure that it's serving their purposes. And when we turn over the models and the documentation so that they can implement them, um, we are also really invested in their ability to build upon that as a foundation and iterate on it. So I'll give you an example. And by the way, this is sort of like one of my best practices in CSI, CSR work anyway, which is pilot everything before you go to scale, because you can have things that you think are brilliant ideas and they don't work. And so I'll bring that up on the challenge side too. But our very first AI for Good project, which we launched within my first year at Dataminr, was with an existing partner that was using our product, First Alert. So we have a relationship with the United Nations, and we have a deeper relationship with one of their organs, which is UN Human Rights. And so we partnered with them on a pilot project to kind of test out this idea I had for an AI for Good program. Their idea was they wanted to automate the detection and classification of attacks on human rights defenders. So UN Human Rights is essentially like a global human rights monitoring organ for the United Nations. They're tracking where threats to human rights are on the rise, how they're evolving around the world, and often intervening from a political perspective, trying to apply pressure where necessary. And as you can imagine, if you're monitoring the entire world, that's a lot of information to try and capture and verify and pull into reports that it can be used by the UN. And they were doing that all manually. They were looking through different publicly available data sources like ACLED and things like that, to understand what these things were happening and then verify them. The model we built essentially automated that, right? So it was able to pull it. You can apply the model to the same data sources, but rather than having an individual go in and say, okay, this is an attack on a human rights defender. This is the nature of the attack. This is the nature of the attacker. This is the nature of the victim. This is when it happened and where it happened. All of that can be automated by the AI model. And as a result, they saw 100-fold increase in their detection of this particular type of event that they were looking for. Now, there's still lots of verification and other things that they need to do to make that usable, but essentially, they're picking up more events, which allows them to do their work more effectively and defend these people who are at risk around the world more effectively. The way we built the model, the way we worked with them, and the way we turned it over and supported them afterwards has allowed them to iterate on the model, where now, instead of just using that one model to detect attacks on human rights defenders, so human rights defenders are things like lawyers, journalists, activists, et cetera, they're now using an iteration of that model, various iterations of that model, to detect and classify violent repressions of peaceful demonstrations, to detect attacks on civil infrastructure, like news outlets, and can continue to do that on all the different facets of human rights indicators that the UN is responsible for understanding. So I'm deeply proud of how we built those relationships, because we don't just fix one problem, we build it in a collaborative way where it allows the organizations to continue to grow from there and do even more work based on that foundation.
And is that just, since you brought that example up, which sounds amazing, how long has that relationship been going? Is it still going on?
Yeah, so the UN has been on our platform since 2018, so predating me.
Right.
And our relationship with UN Human Rights on the AI for Good side, we started in 2022, and we continue to hear reports back from them, and we're having conversations with them about our API and how pulling our data into their own custom-built data analytics system. So we work with their data innovation hub, how that can further their work. So the UN has a big, the UN has like a system-wide or ecosystem-wide initiative to use data more and better. And so that relationship, I think, is a really strong one for both parties. Yeah.
Interesting.
I mentioned pilot, and I'm just, because you asked me for a challenge, I want to pick up that thread. We had another brilliant idea that did not turn out so well, which is, we were like, okay, we really, to my earlier point about our goal, we want to be ubiquitous. We want anyone who can benefit from our product to have it when they need it. And so we have this idea that, like, okay, we have a small team, we can't support every organization with white glove service, but when major events unfold, like a massive hurricane or a typhoon or earthquake or whatever, we could stand up those licenses for organizations responding on the ground for the duration of that crisis and crisis response and recovery time. So we created this crisis response program. We trained the broader CS team within Dataminr, so not just the social good team, but people who work on public sector, et cetera, to support these organizations at scale. And we launched the program. We did a press release. And then we learned two things that now I'm like, oh, that was obvious, but you need to pilot these things to understand, which is one, our data feed is not created equal in all geos. I think now we might actually be able to do a lot better than we did when we first launched this 3 years ago. But we launched with a typhoon that hit the Philippines, and it happened to hit a part of the Philippines that uses social media outlets that we didn't have, weren't a major source of information for our platform. And so we just didn't have that much data. But more importantly, we tried it with another geo where we knew it would be better. And we realized once a crisis is hitting, people don't have the bandwidth to learn a new platform, even if it's pretty user friendly. So responding to a crisis by giving people products when that crisis hits was just never going to work, because you can't pick up a new tool when you're in the midst of response. So that has actually allowed us to iterate. And one of the things we're going to be doing more of is figuring out how we can provide a core number of pro bono licenses to nonprofits on an evergreen basis. So we're not overcommitting our CS team, but that everybody has that sort of seed number that they need to respond, and that has been trained ahead of time so that when a crisis does hit, they know how to use the platform.
So these are organizations that are in hotspots or places that are most likely to have conflict or natural disaster or some event like that. You're trying to identify those top nonprofits, it sounds like.
We're happy to serve really any
Yeah.
nonprofit that fits our eligibility criteria. So we want to make sure that, they're a 501(c)(3) or the equivalent in another country, that they, their mission is to serve the broader public good. And, there's a few other things. We have an anti-discrimination policy, but we don't want to limit it, because one of the other things we've seen is really innovative people can use our platforms in ways that we didn't expect. So we know security, we know disaster response, but like needs assessment on the ground is something that we didn't really think about. But one of our partners, Direct Relief, uses us exactly for that. They're looking at some of the information coming through in the alerts to understand, oh, we need to send like generators to hospitals in this region of Ukraine because the power grid was knocked out there, or because the hospitals were attacked there. So we don't want to limit the use cases, because the people who are using it know better than we do where it can be helpful.
Interesting. Sorry about the ring there. Wanted to switch gears for a second and talk about the pushback against ESG and what a lot of companies are feeling, I think, these days, about how to communicate what you're doing in a way that's obviously beneficial and non-confrontational, given how some stakeholders might look at what you're doing in social good and wonder if that's really beneficial for the company. So, how do you guys approach your communication strategy broadly, and how you communicate with stakeholders? And I'm just curious, do you get any pushback about the work that you're doing, either inside the company or outside the company, where people may think it's not relevant or not connected to what you do?
I feel very lucky that I would say that's pretty minimal, if notable at all, because and this is something that I think about a lot when I think about my own career and where I can make a difference through a role like mine, which is finding companies where the social impact work is just really closely aligned with the core
Yeah.
mission of the company, right? So Dataminr was created, if you listen to Ted Bailey, our CEO and founder, and I'm not going to try and replicate the way he tells his story, because it's really impressive and you could probably find it online. But essentially, like, he was inspired to create this company because he looked at events that were happening, 9/11, et cetera, and thought about, like, okay, with social media, if we had access to what people were posting on social media, would that have allowed first responders to respond more effectively, for people to know what was happening, right? So this idea, like, it was born out of saving lives. Like, that is why Ted created this company. And so while now as a commercial company, that applies to, yes, first responders, police departments, fire departments, et cetera, offices of emergency management. It also applies to corporations, but they're still trying to keep their staff safe, right? And so it by definition, Dataminr is a mission-oriented company. And so what my team does is really just an extension of that. And I think that is why I don't experience the kind of pushback that other people leading teams like mine in other companies might experience. I do think there's always a risk, right? When you're in tight financial times, especially because my team doesn't generate a ton of revenue. It's not our primary function within the company. There's always a risk. So I'm sort of managing to that potential future and trying to make sure that we're fiscally responsible as a team.
Mhm.
But I think given the mission of Dataminr, it's not as big of an issue for us. I also think there's something like there's an important distinction between ESG and CSI or CSR, right? So ESG is really compliance oriented. It's sort of like more of a legal function for companies. And it's more oriented to making sure you're not doing harm as a company. Whereas corporate social impact or CSR also can be oriented to like comms. It doesn't always have to be genuine. But that's more about doing good, like the sort of net positive versus eliminating sort of the net negative. I'm not saying that's entirely true, but like generally speaking, that's how I've seen those mindsets take shape within companies. So people who are doing ESG might think about it more from a compliance perspective, and people who are doing CSI or CSR might be thinking about like, how do we tell stories about our positive impact as a company?
Yeah, I mean, I think the pushback against ESG is because people think it's not relevant to
Mm-hmm.
what the company should be doing. So
Mm-hmm.
whatever form that comes in, CSR, ESG, diversity, equity, and inclusion, companies are trying to figure out how to communicate without um, alienating certain stakeholders.
Mm-hmm.
And it sounds to me like what you're saying, which I think is really good advice for a lot of companies, is how do you align with your company's purpose, your product, your services? What you're doing is an extension of what the company is doing for a lot of people or other companies or stakeholders. And it was born out of a real social purpose that your founder identified. So that all makes sense. Um, we could talk for many more hours. I'm so fascinated with what you're doing, but I want to end with a question that I ask everybody on these podcasts, and it's about the three things you've learned about being a corporate impact leader. Can you tell us three things that you might give as advice as far as what it takes to be a successful corporate impact leader?
Yeah, sure. I think one of them is what we were just talking about. So, like, get to know intimately what the goals, like the commercial goals are of your company.
Mm.
What are your senior executives? What is top of mind for them, and what do they need to accomplish for the company to be successful and to continue to be successful? Understanding those sort of business goals is key, and then figuring out how what you're doing or what you can do can align closely with that and drive those metrics in some way. And sort of, I guess, a branch off from that is like make your own goals measurable, right? So when I'm talking about reach, like we are looking at the number of organizations we serve, right? There are very measurable goals there. When I'm looking at reputation, we're looking at the caliber of the news outlets and media that's picking up our stories, right? And where we're being asked to write bylines about AI for good, right? Like things that are very notable and measurable. And then obviously from the self-sustaining one, there's revenue numbers there. Like I know what the costs of my team are, and so I know what the goal is there that we need to achieve. Um, I would say second, I've also mentioned a bunch on this call, which is being willing to like try something and learn and maybe try something on a smaller scale before putting out a press release about it. To learn and like I'm a big fan of, I think it was it Twain. I don't know. I feel like I misattribute these quotes all the time, but like kill your darlings. Like you might have a great idea that you think is just so totally fantastic, but like you know, edit your ideas and choose to do a few things and do them really well and do them smaller first and grow them. I think that's really important because otherwise, again, you can be developing the profile, sort of like awareness of your team in a way that is not actually helpful to
Yeah,
you or your team,
good
right?
advice.
Um, and then this is my most recent learning, um, and like it like was sort of a trial by fire last year for me to figure this out, but is like ultimately all of those things aside, you need to own your own expertise. There's a reason why it's me leading the social good team at Dataminr and not one of our commercial sales VPs or SVPs, right? I was a Peace Corps volunteer. I've worked in the nonprofit space. I ran a nonprofit team at Google. I know that world in a way, and my team does too, in different ways that other people in the company don't. And so trusting your expertise and owning that and coming to leaders and saying, this is what I think we should do, and here's why, as opposed to like, oh, this leader wants, cares about this, and this other leader cares about this. And so I'm going to try and do a little bit of this and a little bit of this, and then try and build what I think is somewhere in the middle. You can end up with scope creep and lack of clarity on your team. And I'm speaking from experience. This is absolutely the trap I fell into. I was so concerned about a team like mine being at risk that I didn't trust my own expertise. And as soon as I leaned into that, like massive change happened. And I think my whole team feels healthier and more positive and more optimistic for the years to come and what we can accomplish for our partners as a result of that, like taking ownership of like, we are the experts. We know what we need to do.
Wow. I have like 8 more questions that came out of that, but I'm going to leave that for another time because
Okay.
this was fascinating. Thank you so much, Jessie. Really appreciate it. And tell everybody the name of your company again, how to find it, because it's spelled a little bit differently.
Yep.
Anything else you want to mention before we sign off here?
Well, first, just thank you for the opportunity, Tom. It was great to meet you at that event a few months ago. I think it was Kismet. I've really appreciated the conversation.
Okay.
Yep, our company's name is Dataminr, Dataminr. So drop off the E. It's sort of like the 90s Tumblr kind of reference, I guess. And you can find us at dataminr.com. If you type in Dataminr social good into Google, you'll find our team's landing page with our programs. And in terms of final notes, am I allowed to like totally change the topic?
It's all up to you. Go for it.
Okay. In full transparency, last year I had a pretty significant health crisis. So I was diagnosed at a relatively young age with colon cancer. Thankfully, it was caught very, very early. I was stage 1, which meant that surgery was curative. I learned, having had 2 relatives, one on either side of the family, who passed away from colon cancer, that if you go for early screening, colon cancer is in fact very, very treatable. And in fact, if you go for early screening and you have polyps, they remove those and then you never get cancer in the first place. So colon cancer rates are on the rise among younger people. They don't know why. They're doing a lot of research. So the recommendation is go and get your colonoscopy at 45 years old if you don't have a family history, and 40 years old if you do. And that's my public service announcement. And if that is all people hear throughout this entire podcast, I have done my job.
That is so great. And coincidentally, I just had mine last week. So
congratulations. It's
thank
not
you.
that bad, right?
This is why you're the VP of Social Good. You're spreading the message all around. Well, listen, Jessie, thank you so much. It was really a privilege to be able to talk to you, and I'm sure everybody's going to love this. And we will pick this up again later. We'd like to check in with you maybe later this year or next year and just see how you're doing. And hopefully you don't have too many events that you have to respond to, but that you're
Yeah.
all the ones that we already have. But
Yeah.
sounds like you're doing great work. So really appreciate the time.
Thanks so much, Tom. Great
All
to
right,
chat with
take
you.
care.
Bye.
Bye-bye.